Hello, product people. Welcome to the Product for Product podcast, hosted by Matt Green, data advocate and product manager, and Moshe Mikanovsky, product leader and author. Our goal is to serve the product community by helping you find products that can help make your work in product management easier. Thanks for joining us on another episode of the Product for Product podcast.
Welcome back. Today, we're happy to have the founder of Looksie, Brandon Kindred, on the show to talk about the product. How you doing, Brandon?
I'm doing well, Matt. Thanks for having me. As you said, my name is Brandon. I am the founder of Looksie, and we'll hope to have a little great conversation today around product and how we can make it better. My background is in engineering, but I've been really dabbling with UX over the past 2 years, and I'm hoping to be able to bring some of my experience to the industry.
That's perfect. Hey, Matt. Hey, Brandon. Thank you for joining us on the show. Yeah, what you said over there is being an engineer and dabbling into UX. I think most of us have to in some time of our life, right?
Yep.
Mm-hmm. So tell us a bit more about, what is Looksie and how you came by to start it.
Sure. So Looksie is actually a company that came out of a hard pivot from my last startup. That startup was based on engineering, specifically on helping with automated testing rather for user interfaces. And at the end of that, there was an issue where we just weren't getting the traction that we were looking for. And out of the woodwork came UXers, started to say, hey, we discovered this tool. It seems super interesting, but it doesn't really give us the insights that we need. Is there any way that we can get that? And I ended up digging into that quite a bit and speaking with a bunch of people, trying to figure out what was it about this, because for me, it was like, well, I'm an engineer. I understood the problem space, for quality assurance, but I hadn't never really seen how things worked on the UX side of things. So I had no idea that there was even an interest in that. And after speaking with about 50 people, I ended up realizing that not only is there a huge interest, but the UX community is wildly underserved when it comes to tooling. And there was a real opportunity to be able to help them, specifically in the area of UX audits, which is what Looksie focuses in on, to be able to help you identify areas that UX could be improved, give them some actionable recommendations. And most importantly, the thing that's going to be coming out soon for us is reporting, to be able to help them generate these reports. It turns out that UXer might spend up to like 2 to 3 months to do a UX audit. And then after that, they got to spend a couple of weeks, again, doing a report. And all of that is just a lot of work to lead up to actually doing UX work. So the goal is for us is to try to remove those barriers and get them moving at the same pace as the rest of the company.
Oh, that's really interesting. So the problem that Looksie is trying to solve was actually brought to you by a user base or designers or UX product team members. So that's pretty interesting. So, coming from engineering, and you may have been on a product team or in some capacity, but what have you learned about UX along the way that's really kind of helped you develop this product?
Well, there's a couple of things, and I should mention that, this isn't my first bout with UX. It was just my first attempt at really focusing on the UX side of things. I built a similar system for another company a while back where we were doing UX optimization with like big data analytics and data science and whatnot. So that's okay. Where we're at with that, is the fact that the UX community really needs something like this. And I didn't realize it when I was working as a data scientist, trying to solve these problems. I just saw a startup with an issue, right? And to have it move along and see, okay, the UX people really have an issue, and it's not where I thought it was. I really thought that it was going to be, okay, let's just make some minor tweaks to the original system that they were asking about, and we'll be able to get them going. But the reality is that most UXers don't have a great product set. When I talk to people, one of the things that I was really confused about and really a little concerning to me was the fact that everybody describes their tool system, their tool setup, or their ecosystem as disjointed. I talked to some people in the UX industry that are using 20, 30 tools to try to accomplish basic tasks. Yeah, and it's like I was watching people go through, and I didn't realize how big of an issue UX audits were, but I sat down with a few people, and I watched how they were doing just analysis of color to be able to figure out if they had any accessibility issues. And it was painful. It was really painful to watch. These people are using 2 or 3 different Chrome or Firefox plugins to be able to go through, and they're pretty much pointing and clicking and going to other websites and grabbing information from one place and putting it into another, and then checking it and then going back. And it's like, I was watching it. It's like, to do a simple test of a page just to find out, if there's a accessibility issue for the color contrast, they could end up spending a couple of hours on a single page and missing stuff still in the process. And I was like, well, that's wild. And they were like, well, this is the best tool set that we have at the moment. And I was like, well, we can do better than that.
Yeah, that does sound wild. And we see it almost as a pattern when we talk with the different startup founders about the products that are being built, that there is a lot of chaos in many environments for the product team. And we're trying to kind of reduce this chaos and put a system that really help their job. So that's really cool what you're doing. What are the main use cases that someone that will start using Looksie will be able to do with?
Sure. So at the high end, or the 10,000 foot view, if you will, we're a UX audit company, right? We do UX audits, and it would seem like when you look at it, like that's a pretty simple like use case, right? But it turns out that once you start talking to people in the industry, UX audits are actually used by a lot of different people. And it's not just UXers, which was also impressive to me, because I didn't realize how much marketing relies on them, for example, or how much product management wished that they had access to something that could give them some insight. They just kind of, at the moment, trust the process, right? Mm-hmm. You get from design and UX to engineering to QA, to deployment, and everything, because it goes through the process, must be great. But it turns out that generally isn't. A lot of things end up getting lost in translation or messed up or forgotten along the way, and without a really good way to be able to check into where things might have gone wrong, everybody thinks that everything's just hunky-dory, when in reality they've got a lot of really big UX and accessibility issues on their hands. So like there's a lot of different things, and the one that I thought was most interesting that I didn't expect was, and this was out of left field for me, was with UX consultants. They look at our system actually as a lead generation system. So like we have a lot of different things that people use this for, right? It might be a UX person trying to figure out UX. It might be a product person trying to, do quality assurance essentially at the last mile. And it might even just be a consultant or an independent or a freelancer, if you will, going through and trying to do some lead generation by saying, hey, we ran this report, we saw the issue on your site, we'd love to help. So there's a lot of different ways that people interact with UX audits. At the high end, it seems very simple, but once you really dig into it, there's a lot of different use cases.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think from a product management space, a lot of product teams don't have the UX UI function maybe on their team. So they're leveraging past experiences with other applications, and there isn't a shared understanding. So I think this is a good case where it sounds as though Looksie crawls across your website and really kind of automates trying to like identify gaps in the stuff that you may not notice because you just are not familiar with UX as a practice. So
exactly.
Is that what Looksie's trying to do with the automation piece of it?
Yeah. So like, and I get this question a lot actually, is Looksie really automated? Everybody just assumes there's a Wizard of Oz moment, where it's just the guy behind the curtain. And my answer to that is always yes. So we're absolutely 100% automated. This is my bread and butter as an engineer. I'm really good at automating really hard problems, right? So what we do is we go through and we crawl through your sites using a sophisticated crawler. There's going to be one that's even more sophisticated coming, that's going to be able to give you some journey analysis and whatnot. But yeah, we go through, we crawl through your site. What we're really looking for at the moment, UX is important, but we're really looking for is accessibility. We have some things that aren't accessibility related, but I would say about 95% of our audits right now are focused on the accessibility guidelines for WCAG ruling, essentially. The thing that the ADA is built on, because for one thing that I've noticed as I've been going out and talking to people is the one thing underlying everybody's concern around UX at the moment is the fact that the ADA makes it so that way companies that have an online presence or a website that don't conform to these accessibility practices are actually open to a legal risk, which is a real problem for them. And that's where a lot of people are interested in what we're doing. So right now we focus on like color, specifically color contrast, being able to get up to the AAA standard, which is the highest level that you could get to. And even looking at things like how's your content written? Is it accessible? Is it readable? How are your images as far as are they lining up with the way that your content is written? What's the topicality of all those things? So we look at a lot of different things. A lot of it is use a lot of machine learning underneath to be able to really pull out some of this more granular detail that a old school system, if you will, wouldn't generally have the ability to do. So especially around like computer vision and like I said, natural language programming for like that content piece to say, how are you doing with your content? Is it readable? Can people understand it? Is it on point? Is it on topic? Is it serving the purpose? All of these things lead into creating that great experience. And in my opinion, accessibility also creates a better experience for everybody. So you might be focusing on a small target audience or what seems like a small target audience, but at the end of the day, giving them a little bit more accessibility and usability will benefit everybody. It's kind of like the wheelchair ramps on sidewalks. They're meant for people that are handicapable, but they're also meant for people but they also work out for people that are like mothers trying to get their strollers down the street and whatnot.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I view accessibility on the web too, is we get that kind of inclusiveness for everybody and a better experience overall.
Well, unfortunately, companies are actually getting into it because of regulations more than anything. So after there was a few cases, high profile cases of lawsuits against some companies that their websites were not accessible, and some big fines that had to be paid. I think that companies, are kind of don't want to get into that situation.
Right.
But absolutely, the way should be more proactive about making everything available for everyone,
right.
because there is a lot of reasons for that, but it's just being good online citizens and doing our part in helping being inclusive.
Exactly.
And probably some of the listeners might ask the question, how does that differ from some of the other existing systems out there that are already in this domain?
There are some systems in this domain. There's not a lot of them, to be honest with you. Most of them will give you a single page audit, and it's kind of scattershot, in my opinion, the results that you get back. Not to say that they're not valuable, but you're going to get a lot of noise with these other tools. I've loaded up other things, and it's like, well, once I start going through the results that it's giving me, for my individual page, I start to see that like some of these things don't make sense. It's flagging images that have text in them, as things that don't have text. And it's like, well, they do, and I realize that, under accessibility, like images with text in them isn't like the preferable, but there is a standard for that. And you should be able to catch that. And that's like one of the many things that our system will catch that a lot of people, a lot of other systems don't. The other thing that really makes us really good is, one, we're wicked fast, and we could go through your entire website. So right now, we can go through about a page a minute, and we distribute everything, which means that essentially we can do it all in parallel. So generally right now we'll go through and we can do an audit. Let's say I did an audit this morning, 50 pages took 15 minutes. So it's very quick. We're wicked fast with the way that we do things, and we're able to get you some really on point insights instead of just some scattershot results that we hope aren't just filled with noise.
Let's say, are those other companies, when they do these audits, are they inside the application, or are they like a document? Because I'm thinking with this kind of tool, it's like if it identifies an area that you need to improve, maybe it's on multiple pages. So maybe it says, hey, you need to update this text or update this color, and there's problems on multiple pages. Is there going to be a way with Looksie that it maybe updates those in app?
So the ultimate goal is, we'll end up getting there. We're really early phase right now, so it'd be a lot of an undertaking to try to get that hook in, but the goal is to get there. And these other systems don't offer that either. To be honest with you, Looksie, the way that we operate right now is really based on how everybody is used to using these other open source or free-ish tools, if you will, which is to just give us a quick URL and tell us that you want us to audit the site, and we take it from there. We don't have to be hooked into your application, but I'm in talks with a couple of companies now to figure out offering a hosted solution that would allow them to put it behind their firewall and hook directly into their application. It's just going to be a little bit before we can get there.
Absolutely. Cool.
Yeah, that's a good point. And so where do you see yourself in the future? Like, what's where you are right now in the startup journey, and what's your vision for the future?
Yeah, so I just released the MVP, which is the minimal viable product, for anybody that's not familiar, in early January. And I've been working rapidly to try to upgrade the UX audit specifically to be able to provide a more comprehensive set for our audit. On top of that, we also have competitive analysis coming. So there's a couple of things to give you an idea of where we're at and where we're going with things at the moment. The ultimate goal for us is to become a one-stop shop for all things UX. So we really want to be the hub of UX within an organization that touches design, UX, product management, QA, engineering. We feel like everybody in the organization should be involved in creating a great user experience. And we have a roadmap to be able to deliver that.
That's very impressive. And is that also including like a design system, or is that integrating with existing design systems?
It actually does include a design system. That's one of the things that have coming alongside the competitive analysis that we just released, which is to be able to, one, do some of the data extraction to be able to help you define your design system quickly, but also to allow you to do those settings yourself. So that way the system understands what it should be looking for, what it should consider a problem, what your company needs are, and being able to use all that information, kind of like how a person would, but giving the system the intellect to be able to do that.
Yeah, I've been involved now in design system build up, and I see the challenges over there. So that definitely resonates with me at the moment.
Yeah, and it seems to resonate with a lot of designers, UX designers and designers, because of the fact that it's a hard problem, right? Nobody really has nobody really has a specific plan for like, okay, what's my checklist to create a design system? I've looked endlessly for that, and it's like it doesn't really exist. Everybody has their own like flavor of what they think the process should look like, but the end result is always the same, which is a little weird to me. So like that's one of our goals, is to bring a little bit more standardization to some of these processes too.
Yeah, I'm not sure if we talked about what is a design system in the past, so maybe it's a good point here to explain to the audience.
Yeah, so a design system is really your overarching brand, if you will. It will include things like what's the audience that you're talking to, so we know how to write content. It'll include things like what you are allowed and not allowed to talk about. It'll include things like what kind of imagery you're going to use and what kind of colors specifically. So a lot of people will start with the colors and say these colors go with like your CTAs or your click-through call to action, to be able to tell you where these colors should be used, how they should be used, and be able to create a cohesive design across the site, so that way anybody doing any work is able to generate something that looks like it was created by the exact same group at the company. Which is it's a great mentality. It's a great way to think about it, but it's something that's really poorly executed on, in my opinion. And I haven't talked to a company yet that feels like their design system has actually delivered on that for them. Whereas our goal is to help them take that design system one step further and add a quality assurance aspect to it of sorts, where we're able to use that design system to say, hey, here are your issues based on your system and what your company needs are. So that way people are able to keep track of how their design system is serving them and figure out where they're failing at implementing it. Whereas right now, if somebody fails to implement a design system correctly on either a new page, a new email content, or whatever it might be, there's no really good quality assurance method to be able to validate that. Once engineering is done with something and it goes into production, it gets really difficult to undo those mistakes, which is something that we're hoping to help fix.
And it's I believe it's outside of the control of any design system today. So this will keep the two things connected and almost keeps people honest when they develop it rather than after the fact.
Exactly. And well, one of the things that as I was going through and doing some market research, one of the things that I found out really quickly is I did sit down and speak with a bunch of engineers just to validate, some of the things that we were thinking. And one of the things I would notice was most engineers aren't aware of what a design system is or even how it gets implemented. So they'll take whatever is passed to them and hope that it complies. And often enough in the process, whatever design is put together isn't always exactly possible the way that they implement it, the way that the designer wants it. Yeah. And that creates even more problems as the developer then goes off on their own, right? And kind of makes some rogue changes, if you will, to be able to make it work within the system. But in doing so, they might miss a number of issues, including messing up the design system along the way.
Yeah. And we're not even talking about, creating different designs for different pages and refactoring and making components that will be all working the same. Yeah. So there is definitely a lot of things going on in there. Cool. So that's really is like your next thing after the accessibility?
Yeah, so accessibility is going to be something that we're going to stick with for a while. The WCAG guidelines are comprehensive, and we have quite a bit. So the accessibility guideline, the accessibility audits are getting implemented more and more alongside other things that our users ask for, because they're not always asking for more accessibility, even though that's what they want. They tend to have other things that make their current day a little bit easier. Mm-hmm. And so things like we just released the competitive analysis, that kind of feature came with a bunch of new accessibility stuff. and mostly came with a lot of these new settings around the design system and whatnot. That way we can determine how you're doing with your design system versus your competitors. Yeah.
Okay. I want also to ask, on here maybe on Matthew's, favorite subject, analytics.
Yep.
In general, during the analyzing the quality of your product and the quality of your accessibility and any other UX aspects, I'm sure it's an ongoing thing. It's not just one time and that's it. And
exactly.
And then you can collect over time specific analytics related to how the team in general is doing, whether they're getting better or they're getting worse, or they're not improving, or they're learning something from their mistakes and stuff like that.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's something that we can get really granular on over time. Right now, our analytics is a little high level, so we allow you to track things like how is your usability score doing over time. And we do see a little bit of up and down, and like just volatility essentially as people go through and then make those changes, right? A lot of people ask me like, well, once people use this, what's the point of having the service after I run an audit? And it's like, well, unless your company is dead, you're going to need to make improvements. And when you make those improvements, everybody in the process is, not necessarily intentionally, but they're creating issues for you. They're creating technical debt. They're creating design debt. They're creating accessibility issues. There's a million ways. You have a million different ways that things can go wrong within your company, and we're just there to help you be a course corrector, essentially.
Yeah, it's kind of reminds me in the development world how some companies have this shaming mechanism for someone that break the build. So you could do the same thing about that, how someone breaks the UX rules or the accessibility.
Well, the goal for us isn't to make anybody feel bad.
No, of course,
that,
but to learn.
It's to learn, right? So and I found as somebody that has been a lead in a number of technical organizations, is that doing that, like as they call it, the blame game, right? Doing that blame game just doesn't yield the results that you would hope it would. The person is not as quick to learn, because of the fact that they feel attacked and they're onto the defensive more than they're trying to absorb things. So where my thinking is on this is that it would be better, and this is something that I'm trying to work through a little bit with some of the engineers in my network and figure out like what would be best, is being able to provide things like extra tools that go alongside Looksie, things like plugins for your Chrome, or if you're a designer, maybe Figma or whatnot. Things that'll help you identify these issues before they become production level issues. So that way you're never called out, and we help you look great all the way through the process, instead of like, oh, you got all the way here and you messed up. Let me tell your manager about that,
Yeah. Well, when I was saying that, I was kind of like half laughing, but I've heard stories about things like that in the past in some companies. But yeah, I definitely see how helping a person in their work rather than shaming them, it's a much better approach. No, but that's really sounds cool, and it's really aligned with your vision. So I really like that.
Yeah, that's really nice, and I like that idea of if you're creating a new page or something, you already have those guide rails of, hey, this is what the other ones look like, so let's stay within those parameters. Going back to Moshe's point about the analytics, is once you've made these changes, how are they being perceived? Because you may have a perception of, hey, now that I have a unified UX on my site, is your idea of this actually working? So that's where the analytics comes in and says, okay, you had this preconceived notion that this font, this color pattern was going to work for you, but maybe there's some other, maybe you need to go back and change some things.
Yeah, and we see that a lot, actually. We have a few pilots that we ran pilots with, a few companies we ran pilots with, and we end up seeing that kind of stuff where it's like, well, they have, when you look at it at the high level, it's like, well, you got a great color palette, it looks like here. I don't see, visually anything that could be wrong, but then we run it through the system and it's like, well, the color is great, but you're using them in the wrong places, right?
Yeah.
So maybe that color and this color text, shouldn't be used together, because colorblind people aren't going to be able to see that. And a lot of people think, well, how important is it for colorblind? It's like, well, 1 in 12 men have color vision deficiency.
Yes.
So it's a really big issue amongst the male population. Not as big for the female population. Women only experience this at like 1 in 200. So it's still a fairly decent population, but not nearly as sizable as the male population, for like how we experience that. But it's like, you have to think about these things, if your users are using a system and they can't see the text on the button, they're not going to click it because they don't know what it says. And, and so those things are important.
Yeah, very important. Those are one of the first things you learn when you're coming up with data visualizations and analytics is you have to consider the people using it. They're not going to see the red bars. So they're not going to be able to tell the difference. They're not going to see the trend line or whatnot. So that's definitely a great point. Appreciate you mentioning that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And don't ever use red and green together because that one is incredibly common and people can't differentiate between the two.
I always go with like orange and blue. I think that orange and blue are always pretty
good. That's a good, yep.
Well, very good. I had another question about what kind of platform. So obviously with UX, UI, you have the web browser version and then a mobile version. Or is there a particular direction you're heading with Looksie? Obviously the UX is going to be completely different in those two platforms. So maybe you could talk to that.
Only slightly, actually. Believe it or not, a lot of the WCAG and accessibility guidelines specifically apply to both platforms. So for us, it's more of a technical problem. Going through and creating these automated audits to be able to create this, the service for Looksie it's a terribly difficult technical challenge, to be honest with you. So the first step was to do websites. Websites are easy. Everybody uses them. It's nice and easy to get into. The next step is to bring in that mobile and the ability to as well log in and like actually use applications. Mm-hmm. So most of the technical difficulties for us has been around creating a stable distributed system that could do an audit fast enough to be able to make it enticing. A lot of when I first started this process, the first prototype took like 5 days, I think 6 days for a really terrible like set of insights. Mm-hmm. And one thing that I learned from that is people didn't mind the insights, even though they were terrible. What they did mind was the fact that it took 5 days, because a lot of people perceived their ability to go in and do a UX audit. A lot of people, especially in the UX field, UX consultants specifically, will go in and they'll do a very high level audit in like 2 to 4 hours.
Manually,
manually. It's missing a lot of detail. They're going to overlook a ton of stuff. They're really just hoping that they're going to get 1 or 2 things that that latches the client, that the client can latch onto and say, oh, I really like that point. Let's go with that, And the problem is the fact that after the work is all done, there's no real guarantee that you improve the UX.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So for us, it was like, well, we understand where the problem is, but our view of the problem isn't the same as like the UXers, UX consultants' view of the problem, for example. So we had to be able to create this setup where we could first create a really fast and streamlined system that would fit the needs essentially of the community and what they perceived as like a proper system. So one thing that we ran into is everybody wanted the insights quickly. It needed to be in minutes, not in days. So spent a ton of time trying to create that kind of setup. My goal is by summer to be attacking the mobile space and trying to get a little bit deeper into this UX across devices.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned before the on-site for applications. But if someone can put it on an application and use like some credentials for the application, would it be possible to also do that for SaaS and web applications?
Absolutely. Yeah, we've been building out some prototypes to play around with that. We're just working on figuring out the legal compliance side of things at the moment on what bases do we need to cover essentially, because a lot of people don't realize this, but to crawl a publicly facing domain is no concern. Perfectly legal.
It's public.
But once you get into something that's behind a paywall, it becomes not so legal. There was actually a big case where LinkedIn sued like 200 different companies a couple years back for the fact that they were harvesting LinkedIn data from behind an authentication wall. And LinkedIn have ultimately won that case, which means that we have a lot more legal liability, essentially, that we're trying to patch our way around. So that way people come in and can't be bad actors and, use our system for malicious purposes. Yeah,
but if we're talking about licensing it, so I buy the license from you to do it for my application, then why should there be any legal issues?
Oh, yeah. If you buy the license to get the application hosted on premises, at your enterprise company, there's no liability on our end for that. That contract is pretty simple. But as far as this cloud computing like setup where we have everything that's available to everybody, you can come in and just like add domains and review them and whatnot. We get into a lot more of a like tricky scenario essentially. So we're trying to figure out how do we go about that in a way that doesn't compromise the company and still serves the users the way that we need it to.
Right. Okay. Oh, that makes sense. Great. Tell us a bit about, you as a company. How do you handle products? Do you use your own product when you build your product, etc.?
I do, yeah. So Looksie is very much used to be able to test Looksie. And every once in a while, I'll have somebody else that comes in and does that audit and criticizes it. To be honest with you, I leave a number of issues in there so that way when I demo, I can show something that actually makes sense. When I have a perfect site and I demo using our site and there's no issues, it seems like the system doesn't work.
Right.
So yeah, we definitely use it for ourselves. Some people would call us very product oriented, but I like to think of us as very user oriented. So, at the core of everything is obviously the product, but nothing moves within the product. Nothing gets built or considered or anything like that without a number of users requesting it, talking to me about it, and figuring out what their needs are and how to serve that population essentially. Mm-hmm. So we have a very user centric focus to how we do the development, and it's been serving us pretty well so far.
As we wrap up the show, is there any particular place that people can reach out and check out Looksie? I noticed you have some free options on the site. Maybe speak
Absolutely.
to that.
Yeah, so we have a premium plan. So people can come in and give the site a try without having to put in a credit card in or anything like that. You can reach the site at look-c.com. It's spelled just like the colloquial Looksie. And you could, if you have any questions and you want to reach out to me, you can follow me on Twitter at Brandon Kindred. Or you can email me directly at bkindred@looksie.com. That's spelled BKINDRED @looksie.com.
And in this series, we always tell our audience that if they heard about you from here, to let you also know that they heard it on the podcast.
Yes, please let me know that you've heard about it on the podcast. I will be handing out discounts to anybody that hears about it here and lets me know. I don't have a code for you today, unfortunately, but anybody that reaches out can certainly get one.
Perfect. That will be cool. Yeah, I mean, it's just for us, it will be cool to know that we make some impact and there is some words going on out there and people are listening.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much for having me on.
Thank you to all the listeners, and we'll talk to you later.